Welcome to episode 66, I do believe, of Detour 365. And this is uh, Holy Saturday and also the end, so the day before Easter. And also, this is the end of the Old Testament section of our Humanity of God series. And this episode is kind of a lot of things, and hopefully it makes sense. But we're going from the Old Testament into the New Testament, and we're dealing with more theophanies in the Old Testament and God taking human form in these special circumstances. We're having human-like characteristics, and then as we go into the New Testament, we look at Jesus. We're going to focus on. We're going to keep the same series, but we're going to change it a little bit in that we're focusing on the because Jesus was fully God and fully human. So we're focusing on the instances where his humanity or humanness is kind of on full display, like the passages where it says Jesus wept or he was hungry or those kind of things. So, but we are tying in the events of the crucifixion and resurrection, burial and resurrection to especially the resurrection, which is what we celebrate on Easter, to the passage in Daniel chapter 7, which is what we would have looked at anyway today, but it's also a very good passage to tie into the events of the resurrection. So uh, it's probably been done somewhere, some way before, but it's definitely not a passage you usually think of when you think of Easter, but it does tie in pretty well. So Bill is reading um, Daniel 7, 1 through 14. And
Okay.
then he'll be reading Matthew 28, 1 through 10. Um,
Okay.
now,
Complete Jewish Bible.
complete Jewish Bible. Oh, and I did want to mention that this is still in the Daniel 7 is still in the exile period. And um, this is actually, we were trying to do chronological order, but this is actually slightly before the events that we looked at last time. But because says it's in the first year of King Belshazzar. So this would be before the handwriting on the wall, which was 2 episodes ago. But the way Daniel's structured is you have the kind of narratives at the beginning of the book of Daniel, then you have the visions and stuff at the second half. So this is one of the visions that he had. So it's placed after the narrative of events, but just for anybody who is curious about that, and um, we'll see how this all connects. So. Bill's reading the complete Jewish Bible translation for both passages or just the passage of Daniel?
For both passages.
Okay. All right.
Maintain some consistency.
We like consistency
Give it a shot anyway.
and integrity.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babel, Daniel had a dream and visions in his head as he was lying on his bed. He wrote the dream down, and this is his account. I had a vision at night. I saw there before me the four winds of the sky breaking out over the great sea, and four huge animals came up out of the sea, each different from the others. The first was like a lion, but it had eagle's wings. As I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted off the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human heart was given to it. Then there was another animal, a second one, like a bear. It raised itself up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up and gorge yourself with flesh." After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard with 4 birds' wings on its sides. The animal also had 4 heads, and it was given power to rule. After this I looked in the night visions, and there before me was a 4th animal, dreadful, horrible, extremely strong, and with great iron teeth. It devoured, crushed, and stamped its feet on what was left, It was different from all the animals that had gone before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was considering the horns, another horn sprang up among them, a little one, before which three of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. In this horn were eyes like human eyes and a mouth speaking arrogantly. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient One took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. The hair on his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames with wheels of burning fire. A stream of fire flowed from his presence. Thousands and thousands ministered to him. Millions and millions stood before him. Then the court was convened and the books were opened. I kept watching. Then, because of the arrogant words which the horn was speaking, I watched as the animal was killed. Its body was destroyed, and it was given over to be burned up completely. As for the other animals, their rulership was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a time and a season. I kept watching the night visions when I saw coming with the clouds of heaven someone like a son of man. He approached the Ancient One and was led into his presence. To him was given rulership, glory, and a kingdom, so that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His rulership is an eternal rulership that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Matthew 28. After Shabbat, as the next day was dawning, Miriam of Magdala and the other Miriam went to see the grave. Suddenly there was a violent earthquake, for an angel of Adonai came down from heaven, rolled away the stone, and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so terrified at him that they trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Don't be afraid. I know you are looking for Yeshua, who was executed on the stake. He is not here, because he has been raised, just as he said. Come and look at the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell the disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and now he is going to the Galilee ahead of you. You will see him there. Now I have told you." So they left the tomb quickly, frightened yet filled with joy, and they ran to give the news to his disciples. Suddenly Yeshua met them and said, "Shalom." They came up and took hold of his feet as they fell down in front of him. Then Yeshua said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to the Galilee, and they will see me there."
Okay. A very good reading of both of those passages. I do say so.
I did completely change one word that I read. I read disciples instead of the Hebrew Talmudim.
Well, I thank you for reading Disciples.
You're welcome.
So, on the surface, I guess if you're, especially if you're new to both of these passages, it might be a little confusing as to how they connect. But we have this powerful vision in Daniel 7 of the Son of Man, which I see as pointing to an appearance of Jesus in this vision and the dominion of God's kingdom over all of these other kingdoms, that come and go throughout history. And then you have the events of Matthew 28 in the New Testament when Jesus is, after he was crucified and buried, and when he was raised from the tomb. And of course, that happens during the time of Rome. And you have a similar you have a similar theme. You have these you have the focus on these earthly kingdoms versus the kingdom of God. And in the time of Jesus, the Jews were very much hoping that the Messiah that was to come, at least how they were interpreting the scriptures in their own, not all of them, but most of them were interpreting them as like the Messiah was going to come and be a military leader and take out the Romans. When in fact God was establishing this, this eternal kingdom that was something much greater. And so Daniel kind of has this vision of the future in a way, you could say that. And then so you have God's eternal kingdom, and you have this reality that the kingdoms and the things of this world kind of come and go. And we'll get more into that here in a second, but you have that question of which one are you pursuing, but also you have just that reality that's present in both cases. Um, I do want to talk about we'll start with Daniel's vision, and we'll kind of go through it first. These animals. Now these animals that are in Daniel's vision, the first one points to Babylon itself, right? It was we didn't go over the time that the Nebuchadnezzar had the I think we mentioned it when he had the dream about him, his humbling experience that he had where he became like a where he was driven away from his palace and he became like an ox and he was eating grass. And um but anyway, the lion that had eagle's wings. So you have this majestic creature, and the Babylonians were very majestic. That empire was seen as like kind of the height. And then it says its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet, and a mind of a man was given to it. So it's talking about a lot of people see this as pointing to Nebuchadnezzar and what happened to him, as he was kind of when he was walking along the roof of his palace and he was looking at the city and he's like, "Oh, look at what great things I built and all these great things I did." And then immediately he was like given the mind of an animal and he was kind of driven crazy. And then he admitted later on that um, basically that God is the one that allowed him to do all of this. And so then he came back and he was restored. And then you have this bear that comes along. And that's pointing to the Medes and the Persians, because they were kind of a step down from the Babylonians as far as their, a bear isn't as majestic as a lion, but it's very powerful. And the Persian Empire was a very powerful empire, and it was. Then you have the leopard, which is interesting because that points to a lot of people see that as pointing to the Greeks, like Alexander the Great coming through, because his conquest was very fast. And the leopard is very fast and it has 4 heads, and Alexander the Great's empire got split into 4 different regions. Then you have this monster with this beast with iron teeth. And just like with the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream way back at the beginning of Daniel had a part of it that was iron. So that's usually associated with Rome, because of like Rome and the Iron Age and iron weaponry and all that. Um, so I just wanted to kind of point that out, that a lot of this vision is in the future from Daniel's perspective. And then you have this kind of throne room scene, and you have this it's kind of very reminiscent of the book of Revelation, like how Jesus appears in Revelation like in the glorified form. And it says his dominions an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. And you have this very interesting exchange, and I should have included this in the reading. And I guess I could pull it up, but if Bill pulls it up first, or whoever pulls it up first, you can
Yeah.
read it. When Pilate's asking Jesus, before Jesus was crucified, he was standing before Pilate, and Pilate was asking him, like, "So you're a king?" And Jesus says, "My kingdom's not of this world." Um, I think that passage could have fit pretty well in here. I wanted to. Is that in the book of? It's in the Gospels. It's in Luke 23. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "You have said so." Let's see. Might be in a different. Okay. Uh, Maybe it's in John, Gospel of John. Maybe that gives a more complete account of that. Let's see. Um, So Jesus before Pilate. Hmm.
What exactly are you looking for?
The interchange that Jesus has with Pilate. Um, oh, okay, yeah, I see it here. It was right in front of me. Um, so Pilate's the Roman governor, and he's talking to Jesus before he delivers him over to be crucified. And he's trying to find a way to make sense out of everything, basically. Um, let's see. So Pilate asked him again after he asked Jesus again, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did the others say it to you about me?" And then Pilate says, "Am I a Jew, your nation, and the chief priests have delivered you over to me? What have you done?" And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, but that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." And then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus said, "You say I am a king, and for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world to bear witness about the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And then Pilate asks him, "What is truth?" And then after he said this, he went back outside. And then that's when they were asking about releasing Barabbas instead of Jesus. I always found it interesting that he never gave. Pilate asked him that question, what is truth? And then he kind of leaves, doesn't give him a chance to answer that, um, which you kind of wish he would.
Yeah, I was about to ask about that.
That would have been interesting. But instead, he goes outside and talks to the mob. So, um, so my kingdom is not of this world. So that's kind of it's something greater. It's over the world. It's in the world, but it's not of the world. But you do have the kingdoms of the world that are shown to us. I guess the major ones are shown to us in Daniel, and there's some argument that where do the modern day superpowers fit into this, and how much of this is talking about the end times, especially when you get to some of the other visions in Daniel. But the common theme really is that all these great empires, all these great nations have a time that is given to them, and they come and they go. And but God's plan is at work, in the midst of all of it. And God sends Jesus, the Messiah, uh, God incarnate, into the world during the time of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was, I mean, there's debates over which empire was the strongest and the biggest and all that. But I mean, the Roman Empire certainly has its place as one of the most expansive and influential empires to ever be, right?
Yeah.
Um, and still, um, Jesus was not sent to overthrow the Romans. Um, the Romans were there for a reason. God used that. Well, and kind of on a side note, it's interesting how the Roman Empire really plays a role in like it was kind of the perfect time for the Messiah to come onto the scene because, the Romans had this network of roads and they had all this, that part of the world was very interconnected and just kind of as a side note, almost like that infrastructure was put there, and
Well, it allowed disciples to go to India and to England
yeah,
and to Spain. And that was, the far reaches of the known world at the time. Uh, and we look the uh, Jewish religion has survived for 5,000 years. Uh, Christianity has survived for 2,000 years and survived through, well, at this point, a number of different civilizations. Uh,
well, and, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did. You mentioned something that I wanted to ask you what you think of the temptation to tie Christianity to a certain civilization. I mean, certainly Christianity has had an influence on Western civilization, like a heavy, has had a significant influence. But um, when I guess it could be a certain situation where, if you look at like traditional Western civilization is Christian, but not all Christianity is traditional Western civilization. That makes sense.
yeah, that's kind of like, uh, Volkswagens are cars, but not all cars are Volkswagens.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
uh, there is, something in Christianity that set up a framework for Western civilization. But Western civilization is certainly not uh, Christian in a lot of ways.
yeah. Well, I mean, we have a lot of Greek and Roman philosophy mixed in with our, milieu. But, we kind of talked about that last time with dualism and but I guess if we look at like the values and like I mean, well, I guess cathedrals might be a good example of like a good physical example of this, but, this whole idea of it being very central to a lot of Western civilization for sure. But, again, all that is kind of Greek and Roman stuff is kind of mixed in there, but, and every culture kind of has its own like Indian, well, in India, for example, and I have some experience, but I'm not speaking as like the authority by any stretch, but you do have certain, not Hindu practices, but certain, well, maybe practices, but certain things that carry over. I guess a good example from the Western side would be like Christmas trees and stuff, like stuff like that, it's not necessarily explicitly in the Bible or Christian, but it's something that we took from the culture, and there's certain practices and ways of doing things that different cultures take from their existing, background. And
Oh,
Um,
yes, certainly there, Christmas. You know,
yeah,
we took the Saturnalia and made it Christmas. Uh, uh, there wasn't anything wrong with that. We uh, needed a time to celebrate the birth of Christ, and that was a handy time. Uh,
yeah,
we know that Christ wasn't born at that time of year. That's immaterial.
yeah,
Uh, what matters is the spirit behind it and the meaning that we attach to the season. Uh, if Western civilization were truly Christian, we would care more about people. We would not exercise the greed that we do. Uh, I am not. I'm certainly. I do like the concept of meritocracy, but um, but having 90% of the money of our society tied up in the handful of people that it is wrong.
it wasn't necessary. Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of always no culture has been perfectly. Well, I guess the one exception might be Acts, like the disciples in Acts. What is that, Acts 2, where they shared everything, but it wasn't like a forced sharing of everything. It was like they
Yeah, well,
voluntarily.
again, that wasn't the government. That was
Yeah,
a
that was the.
small segment of society at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
But
but we're
Jesus said, "The poor you'll always have with me." You should always look out for them.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, and we have always had the poor with us, and uh, some of us are. Some of us are thankful for what we have every day.
Yeah.
Uh, but we have
I mean,
this imagery in Daniel. You know,
yeah,
that's
but as long as we're human, there will be people that will be poor, and we have to have a meritocracy because we're
well,
human with all the inherentness of being human, like um, complacency
I
and
agree with that.
laziness and greed. Like if you don't have a meritocracy, those take hold.
I agree. Oh, I certainly agree. Uh, there are certainly uh, lazy people out there.
Like human nature is, uh, we want the betterment of us and the people and things that we care about above the betterment of, on average, what other people care about, like our own morals and things like that. Our family, friends, people we care about, we want them to do well. And if we don't have a system that acknowledges the fact that that is true, like that we want to do well for ourselves and the people we care about, um, and we would have like a system where everything's redistributed so that people are equal, then that greed's still going to be there, or that, well, I wouldn't call it greed, but the human nature is still going to be there, and it will just take the form of corruption instead.
Oh, I'm not saying everybody be equal, son,
Well,
but I am saying that you don't
I
let
just, I just
people
think it's
die in the streets.
um, what I mean, it is it.
it's very dangerous to say I like a meritocracy, but
Yeah. Well, and I guess something we
the
wrestle
rest
with
of,
is how to.
I mean, the rest of nature is
Yeah.
strictly a meritocracy.
You're right.
Yeah. Um. Well, I guess when it relates to, I guess you could look at the Bible for one and see. You can see that tension or that that, especially if you look at the book of Proverbs, which we have looked at a lot in the past. Proverbs is very much you do the right stuff and progress and
Get rewarded with riches and stuff.
yeah. But then you also have that. Well, I mean, even in the New Testament, you have Paul talking about the worker being, Paul mentions, I do believe, a couple of times, like, contributing to society. I'm like giving cliff notes basically, but like contributing to society and, all that kind of stuff. And, um, but then you also have like the grace side of things that's definitely a part of it that, Jesus was certainly not. I think it's hard to put labels on things. Well, I know that's not like a cop out or anything like that, but I've had people argue or tell me, well, Jesus really is more of a communist or something that not, or a socialist, but I mean, not you're putting like you're putting a 20th century idea onto the kingdom of God, I guess, and we mentioned this before, like last time. Were we talking about the resurrection and like the Sadducees mentioning like, well, if you were married to like five different people and then you die and then you go to heaven, who are you going to be married to? That question.
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of get into if you start thinking about because no system, no government or no system really is perfect. I mean, there's certainly ones that work better than others, I would say, but um when you start thinking about like the kingdom of God, and I almost feel like we kind of imperfectly implement some of these ideas, and uh, we might come close in some cases, but um, there's never been a time where it's been, if you look at any point in history, like even early on in American history, like we had certain things that were better and certain things that, were not as good as they are today, I guess. There was more equality, I guess without getting too political, there was more equality in income and all that maybe 30, 40 years ago, but you still had other issues that we were dealing with.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly a larger middle class.
Yeah,
But if you look back 50, 60 years, half the population was working instead of most of it. And then we didn't have outsourcing of
yeah,
good production to a different country. So the combination of doubling the amount of people wanting to be in the workforce and
yeah.
taking away so many jobs is going to do weird things to pricing and wages and everything.
Well, and I think they even had this trouble in the Roman times, Well, not necessarily the same trouble, but a version of it. There was always some kind of um during Jesus's time, wasn't the Romans were, I mean, especially disliked because they would, because of their tax system, they would kind of squeeze, they would try to the reason why the tax collectors were hated so much, and Matthew was a tax collector, and Jesus invited him to be in the invited him to be one of his disciples, but the reason why the tax collectors were hated so much is they had like an incentive to like get as much money out of people as possible, and, they were pretty ruthless and all that. So, um,
Yeah, I guess I'm just wary of it just wouldn't do good things to humans in the long run to like certainly probably wealth shouldn't be allowed to like exponentially outstrip your contribution. Uh, but that's kind of a slippery. I mean, that's obviously the slippery slope. But you do run into the danger if you do wealth redistribution or protect people from being poor and or dying from it. You protect people from the consequences of their own actions. And the minute you start doing that, we start degrading. Like if there's not that consequence, like certainly people get old and less able to contribute to society and need to be taken care of. And um, but uh, yeah, you just can't say to a group of people there are no consequences for you not succeeding, and then expect that group of people to like maintain a level of uh, drive or like good human nature.
Well, and you do kind of wonder how, you have this
Like raising it would be like raising a spoiled child on a national level.
yeah,
Kind of.
well, and I guess there is that, but then there's
But
also
there,
the
I'm just saying the flip
yeah,
side of that. The
yeah,
compromise
yeah,
is what's required.
100%.
But I don't
Um,
feel like you can have a discussion of one without acknowledging the other side of that coin.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I do kind of wonder, with the death of with the death of Jesus on the cross, he's taking our place and doing, he lived the life we should have lived, and he took our place basically, received the judgment,
Punishment we deserved.
what we deserved, but then, so he had to be fully human and fully God to fulfill that, to fulfill that mission. And then, then you have the resurrection, which is, the triumph over all sin and death and all that. But there is kind of that, we do need incentives, and there's certainly, I guess that it's kind of hard to articulate, but it is
Well,
it is, you also have that motivating part where, you realize that God did all of this for you, so you do kind of feel like this, the way people talk about, the works following, you're not saved by your works, by doing great works or anything like that, but the works are the evidence that you had a genuine change of heart.
Well, the book of James.
Yeah, well, the book of James, I mean, definitely doesn't say like, hey, you should just
If
fart
you are
around
a
and
Christian, if you really are a Christian, you will do good works because have been, you are being changed. You are saved and you are being changed by the Holy Spirit. You have been saved and you are thankful for that. And thus you will do good works because of that
yeah,
very fact.
yeah, that makes sense because you can't say you believe in something and then act differently. And um,
but I do agree that we do have to have kind of those two.
or like
Maybe that's
it'll happen as
like,
a result.
yeah, yeah. Um, and maybe that's the purpose of God allowing governments and all this, because we do have to have, at least for the time being, those, because if somebody doesn't have a genuine change of heart, or, the only thing that'll keep them in check is some kind of incentive to not, you know.
Well, you see that with heaven and hell. You've got the carrot and the stick, essentially. Um, and I think humans just have to have a carrot and a stick to be optimally motivated to anything. Like you can't. That's the same conversation as um, like having. Now, I'm not saying this was what was being argued for, but like if someone was of the opinion that like all wealth should be redistributed and we should all be equal in income, essentially, and like just because we're all human and we're all valuable, that's the second half of that's true. But um, like that you'd be missing the stick. You have to have that fear of failure or fear of consequences. Same as like that's there's hell in the Bible. Like they present hell, and then also there's heaven, and the Bible even associates heaven with as we mentioned a minute ago. with personal success in the world here, or rewards here. Not that you can take those with you, I guess, but um, like it associates the same behavior and as being rewarded here with like lands and power, essentially. Maybe I'm misparaphrasing that, but with also getting to heaven. So a lot
Well,
of
well, there
parallels.
is a certain like, I mean, the getting into heaven part, is based on, trusting in the work of Jesus, and but it is interesting that,
I didn't mean like
it still
that. I
counts.
didn't mean that. Yeah, I didn't mean that like success here was required to get
Oh
to
yeah, I
heaven. I
understand.
meant to say that like the same person that would be successful here would get into heaven, essentially, or like acting out the teachings of the Bible would get you successful here, right? And also get you into heaven. There we go. That's close.
Well, that's true. That's kind of like a Proverbs idea, too, that it's like, this but I guess I was kind of about to say that there are, and I gotta be careful how I say this because I don't necessarily know the details of it, but it is mentioned, I believe, by Paul, and that there are certain rewards in heaven, that it's you're, and that's kind of a
We
weird
will be
concept.
rewarded. We will be reward. It says we will be rewarded in heaven for the things that we do for Jesus,
Right.
the things that he, the things that he wants us to do.
So,
That
hmm.
gets tied into us having the discernment to know what Jesus wants us to do.
Well, what's the I mean, that raises the question.
Well, it is kind of ambiguous as to what the rewards are. It
Well,
doesn't
I was going to
say.
say that raises the question, or like, so that introduces a lack of parity in heaven, which I guess you could say okay, but then that at the same time would say that like there's actual, in order for a reward to be a reward, it would have to be something that you would want and that people don't. Not everyone has, and I mean,
That's right.
so
But then there wouldn't be any jealousy in heaven. So,
yeah, but if you that's a weird, that would be almost an impossible thing to say because I don't know. If you want it, then it would be something like, and it's something additional. It'd be something that would set you apart and above other people in heaven. I guess it's fair to say they wouldn't want that reward, but why would it be a reward if they don't want it? It wouldn't be a reward then.
It would make you different.
Yeah. I guess
Um,
once you all got to heaven, then they wouldn't want it anymore. But if while you're still on earth, it's something you would want. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a reward. I mean, you want a reward, and if it's not something you want, then it's not a reward.
that's
I'm not
something that
positive
we
on that.
won't understand this side of heaven. But, that is something that is in Scripture that is one of those things that we won't understand until we get there. Um, um, but, you know, I'm
Well, I mean, that would go even that even goes right along with the argument for
meritocracy.
meritocracy. Yeah.
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah.
but I guess it
And
would be a perfect meritocracy because, you don't.
Yeah, because everyone would just acknowledge that, hey, they earned it.
Well, yeah,
that's
because
right.
I guess God would say, like, yeah, here's you know, God would know the truth. So,
That's right. That's right. And also, one thing, that a lot of people have, uh, gets laid off on the government. The safety nets didn't exist even in rudimentary form until the 30s. They started being formed with Social Security and that here in the United States, uh, the late 30s. Uh, uh, Before any benevolent help, you had to go to the church. You had to approach the church and get help by the people in the church, uh, which made um, which made a very real connection between people in the congregation and those people being helped tangible. And starting in the 30s and 40s and to date, the social programs have taken that away from people being aware of helping people. And I think that has really hurt. It's really hurt our ability. It's really hurt our ability to empathize with others. Um, um, I mean, there is still, in a number of churches, there's still a lot of benevolent work being done with, the poor. But certainly not like it used to be.
Well, I
And
mean that you could say that's like the government, like learning and embodying the church almost there.
but it has severed that connection between individuals helping other individuals.
Hmm.
And me being aware of me helping somebody else. And that is a very concrete thing.
Well, yeah, it does become very and this is separate from the argument of, I guess, the political side of it, but it does, you fill out nowadays, you would fill out a form and submit it, and you would ideally, I mean, I guess you would prove that you're a person, but that you would fill out a form. It's very different from, I mean, we did have a few people that would come over at the little church, that would come in and then they'd realize we didn't have any money and
Yeah.
that they'd only be there for maybe a Sunday. But I'm guessing it happens quite a bit at larger churches. You still have people coming in that,
Oh,
but
yeah.
even that, I mean, it is kind of
What
a,
they came in and saw that the church didn't have any extra money and left, or what?
yeah, there was some people that would come like at especially the little church over in St. But I mean, I guess you would see them, and but I guess with a larger church you wouldn't necessarily. I mean, the church that I go to right now and that my in-laws go to, they have like a homeless, they do a homeless ministry and they also have homeless.
Oh, you're talking
So,
about people seeking help, not people showing up to worship.
well, but they would sit through a worship service, um, shifting back to the small church that we were at in St. Matthew's, I'd say the name, but this is going out, so I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But anyway, we would have people that would come every now and then, and they would sit through a worship service, and then we had one guy that came in, and he had a. I think the strangest. I think this, just to tell a little story, but the strangest one was the. He came in. It was the husband and wife, and he came in and he had a binder, like a big photo album full of like his life and like all the things that he did, and I don't know. It was a little odd. He's kind of trying to, I guess, bring us up to speed as to his life story and all the stuff that he did. And he was a basketball player and did this and that. And it was interesting. But, at the end of all of it, it was like, well, we really need help with this thing, this
So he was like a traveling salesman for himself.
kind of. It was kind of like, yeah. Yeah.
Here's my catalog.
But then
Buy
you
my
get,
product.
but it was like a legitimate, like a thick binder. I don't know why this thing's coming up here. It was like a thick binder with photos and
Huh.
articles, and it was. But then you would get some people that would just kind of come in like they would kind of look like they came in off the street. They would just kind of sit through the worship service, and some of them looked like they were not doing too well, but they would always ask for assistance, and usually monetary assistance at the end of the worship service. But there was a guy that kind of played a little bit of a long game. He came in and he came to several. He came like regularly for a couple months, and he got somebody there to like buy him a car, and then for work.
Really?
And then after the car was bought, he never saw him again.
Really? Wow.
But yeah, he was coming for like 3 months, and he was kind of. I don't know. I would like to think he wasn't like slowly trying to work somebody, but maybe he was.
Mm,
I mean, you do
mm.
kind of wonder, I guess, kind of
Probably
bringing
just
all this
left the
back
home.
to like the kingdom of God and how we're supposed to live it out. You do kind of wonder how I mean, it takes a lot of discernment, especially in those situations. Because you want to help people, but at the same time, well, I mean, Jesus certainly helped people, but he didn't. I don't know. I'm trying to think of if he had. There were certainly. I mean, I guess it's hard to compare the situation in the ancient Roman Empire, even though we do have a lot of similarities to the Roman Empire. But
Well,
that's
well,
another.
Well,
Jesus was blessed with, an acute sense of discernment
Yeah,
because, remember when he went back home, you know, he, they couldn't do a lot of healing back at home because they didn't really believe.
yeah.
They had grown up with Jesus and they didn't really believe that he was the Messiah. And
I just
since
had an
they
interesting. I just had an interesting thought. I thought you're talking about how we are like Rome and everything. And I was thinking that like all the civilizations that have come about have been essentially different takes. Like the system that a civilization is has been essentially like a different take on the nature of the average nature of humans. Because in a perfect so-called perfect civilization, the system that it comprises would be set up so that it perfectly matches the average of human nature, like to motivate people to be productive essentially, or to like be good and productive,
yeah,
right? Like if your civilization system perfectly matches human nature, then well, anyway, like but the ways that it doesn't perfectly match the average of human nature are like these little points of like cancer in that civilization that like grow and like twist that civilization in a certain way and eventually might cause its downfall. And I'm thinking like so every civilization that as civilization has gone throughout history, different civilizations have come up and gone down and come up and gone down. Um or different nations. I should have been using the word nation here, but uh we're kind of maybe narrowing towards that ideal system, hopefully. Um yeah, anyway, that was my thought.
Well, and I mean, I
well,
do think that if you look at the teachings in the Bible, I do think they kind of have that. Um, you do gain a great understanding of human nature, just made in the image of God on the one hand, but on the other hand, you had the fall, and you have the propensity to sin and go. You have all these things kind of mixed together, which does kind of. I do kind of wonder what. Jesus, I guess he was the example. I mean, well, he is the example to follow, but um, his human side was, I guess, the ideal human side, because he did. I mean, he did experience the things that we experience, but it wasn't like the sinful human side.
Yeah.
But I do kind
Well,
of wonder how things
I
will
will.
work out with what's that?
I was just thinking, like, yes, I think that that would be the ideal human side. I don't think it would be wise to set up a civilization which acted as if that was the expectation, though, or set up a nation or civilization that functioned as if that was how people really would function, right? Because you can't set up a because we're not all Jesus, and we're not going to be anytime soon.
Right.
Like the average human is not going to act like Jesus. So if you were to set up a civilization that was like an idealistic civilization, like very idealistic about human nature, it would fail very quickly.
not until
Um,
the millennium.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I was kind of wondering is how, things would look. And I guess again, we won't know, but because there is that period. Do all the major interpretations of like the end times and Revelation have the millennium
You
uh,
know,
of Christ's rule? Because isn't there
but
like a millennial and
yeah, there's
pre and post and
there are some ways of looking at the end times that does not have a millennium with, you know, 1,000 years of peace, love, and yeah.
but wasn't the catch in all that that the people after that 1,000 years they weren't
After the 1,000 years, there's the loosing of the devil.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not all, roses and rainbows.
Well, I guess, like the people have it great for 1,000 years, because God's in charge, but it's then they kind of still isn't there a school of thought that they still kind of rebel or there's still some, there's some kind of like it doesn't hold, or God doesn't let it hold, I guess, on purpose, then you have that final time of tribulation, right? And then you have
Well, there's that, that certainly that final time when Satan comes and walks abroad, and uh, when is that? We know that he is allowed to stride the earth again. We don't know how long that is, um, and we certainly know that humankind is a fallen creature. Is a fallen creature.
well, and I do have one question, I guess, as it relates to the present day, and this is just kind of a question that's going out there. The systems of the world, are well in one way, in one way God is over the kingdom of God is over all the systems of the world, but in another sense, for right now in this period, the systems of the world and the governments and all that, they're all imperfect, but and I guess it depends on your theological position as to, because does say that the world is given over to, you know, Satan for a time, and that the systems of the world are, you know, I want to say evil, but I mean evil in certain cases, but definitely not
We
God's.
could be anywhere on that sliding scale, William.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I look at the way we treat one another. Think about the millions of people who are trapped in human trafficking even today. Uh, that's terrible.
yeah.
Even today, there are there are millions of slaves in the world today. Uh, most people wouldn't think that.
Well,
I don't think your regular person on the street would think that there is
yeah,
slavery in the 2020s.
yeah.
but there are millions of people living in slavery every day.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and why was Jesus raised from the grave? He was raised. We celebrate. We remember his being raised from the grave tomorrow. Uh, and he rose to be with the Father and came back down for 40 days on earth and taught and went back to wait for the time of his return. And heaven knows, I wish he'd come back. And heaven knows, I hope I'm worthy of his return. Uh, uh, our world, we have so messed up this world. We're doing so many wrongs to so many people.
Are doing probably more right than has ever been done before, also.
Well, now there's a good chance of that.
I think you could probably use like the average standard of living as a good approximation of like how much right is being done, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, and
Like,
you
you
know,
could probably use the average standard of living as an approximation of how closely your civilization matches human nature.
well, and I have heard the argument about since the resurrection of Christ and the church being established, and I mean the church has definitely done some. The church, speaking of like the church worldwide, has definitely done some bad things. I mean, for sure that aren't in line with what God, would want us
That's true. Yeah.
to do. But um, as a whole, I mean, even the idea that like slavery is not a good thing, that we should not practice slavery. I mean, that was kind of a new idea back in the Roman days. I mean, that was kind of like what? You
Yeah.
mean it's not a good
Yeah.
idea?
And I mean, well, but also, I mean, slavery is not good, right? But not all slaves or like systems where there was slavery had their slaves mistreated. I think in like Roman times, majority of the no, I mean you could still say it's a prison, and I think that'd be very true. Kind
Yeah.
of thing. Like they're still slaves. So it's hard to not that it would the goal should be to argue for slavery, but you part of that would be or part of that conversation would be to acknowledge that the slaves were on average like cared for and I think large part treated as family members. Um,
Now somebody's gonna clip that 5 second little.
yeah, yeah. But I also wanted to add to my saying that like like the average standard of living in a nation or civilization could be approximated by or would be a good approximation of how closely its systems match human nature. I wanted to add to that that the goal or the best possible result from that would not be every human being equal because we're not. Uh, I know it's pretty popular to say we're all equal. We're all equal in value, but we're definitely not all equal in capability or output or motivations or goals. People don't want to do all the same thing. The only way we would all be equal is if humans were identical, and that's not true.
You're
Well,
absolutely right.
um,
So even
this
in the
might be,
best possible case civilization, you would still have poor people
yeah.
because humans are humans.
But I guess if we're talking about zooming out and talking about the eternal sense of like how God is going to look at our lives, C.S. Lewis had some interesting ideas, and again, this is C.S. Lewis. Is not like I'm not ripping this right out of Scripture, but I mean, this is you could make a case for this from Scripture, but and it certainly fits that, God is aware of all of our circumstances and our life and our background and our, the cards that we were dealt, what we did with them. And, um, there's certainly in this life, it might not be on this side of things, it might not show, but, since God is aware of the whole the truth of the whole picture. There's certain people are blessed with being born with certain things that lead certain factors that lead to like agreeable personalities and um better health, better mental faculties and all that. And um whereas certain people are this is in mere Christianity somewhere, but that anyway, but he talks about that certain people are born into difficult circumstances, and their genetics are you know well, I don't want to talk about genetics, but they might have some kind of health condition that they have to deal with, or they have some kind of alcoholic parents, or say I mean, there could be a million different things, but that they might have to put in 10 times the amount of effort to
Obtain the same result as somebody else.
attain the same result, but that God is aware of God is aware of the whole story, and that it's that there are surprises in store for us. I'm not saying that to scare anybody, but that's actually, I mean, probably a good thing. But that um, Jesus certainly saw people as they were, and he was fully human, and that he had to walk the roads and eat and drink and do all the things, but and experience the emotions that we experience. But also he could look at people like you were saying, and have discernment about um, what was behind the because certainly people came to him that had impressive lives and had impressive things going on, but then there were people that well, I guess the widows might be a good story. We saw the people putting in the money, and the widow put in the little penny, but that was like, he knew that was all she had, so she put in all that she had. So, um, and it said that he loved the rich young man that came to him that asked him what he needed to do, but at the end of the day,
He
but
said
anyway,
what?
yeah.
Uh,
But I hate
you
to.
know,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, like the rich young man couldn't do it, so he failed to acquire the kingdom. Uh,
But maybe he was also asking the wrong question because he was asking, "What do I need to do?" Like, which isn't really the right question.
um, that's true. Um,
Like a checklist. Um,
but
well, I hate to run right now, but I need to go down and
Doug,
10 o'clock dog thing. So,
uh,
do you want me to leave it rolling, or should we just take a break, take a pause, take a beat,
take a pause.
take a pause? All right. Don't say anything profound. All this is not. All this is stopped. So, we will be right back, and nothing will be said until we return. Well, nothing of
Well,
consequence.
I may say something, but I need to take a short pause myself.
All right. Well, um, it will appear that we're back in an instant if you're watching this, but let's set the time to 15 minutes, and whoever can stay can stay. So
Oh, I would certainly hope to be back in quicker than 15 minutes.
quicker than 15.
Yeah,
All right. And we're back for part two, which probably won't be that long, but we just want to kind of wrap things into a cohesive something or other. And I did want to kind of bring us back to the beginning eventually. We've kind of gone over a lot of different topics and ground, and this will certainly not be the only time that we discuss the resurrection of Jesus and those events, because that's kind of something we probably mention almost every time. But we are making this transition here into, and I had a little bit about it. This transition we are making from God making these appearances at select times in the Old Testament and having showing these different traits um, that we've discussed. Sometimes it's not a literal form like a hand or a foot or something like that, but it's a emotion that God shows, or it's a something that God does that at certain times in the Old Testament. It's been interesting looking at how that kind of has spanned the entire history of the entire
Wait,
narrative of the Old Testament.
or I'm
What's
sorry.
that?
Did you mean to be recording right now? I don't think you are.
Oh,
I could be wrong.
I am recording, I think.
Oh, okay. It didn't bring up the notification.
Well, I guess you pre-approved.
I guess so.
We hope so. um, to the incarnation, to Jesus being God with us all the time, in the flesh, and then God being God with us today, of course, through the Holy Spirit. But you have that transition that we're making, and there's certainly going to be a lot of examples that show Jesus's humanity. Just him being human um, all the time. But we're gonna be kind of selective in looking at certain passages, and they might include certain ones where like Bill was mentioning earlier, when he goes back to his, certain times, like when he goes back to his hometown, and his he appeared just like every other human, and then a lot of people around him that grew up with him thought he was just a regular, that there wasn't anything else to him. The people in his village were like, this is Mary's son, this is Joseph's son, the carpenter. What's he doing, going around healing people? So, there are passages like that, and there are passages that say, Jesus wept, he was hungry, like when he was tempted in the desert, he was hungry and thirsty, and then of course with the events of this week, like with the crucifixion, the suffering he endured, um, and then even in the resurrection, I find it interesting that even in the resurrection, he still has the marks, um, from the crucifixion, when he appears to people, and so. We are making that transition, but we're still sticking with the same, the same theme. And I do see the tie-in with Daniel and the whole history of, God being with them even in that time of exile. Um, God allowed them to go into exile, but they weren't completely abandoned while they were in exile in Babylon and then Persia. And then also during the time of the Romans. And the same is true for us today. We might be under different, we might be in different circumstances and in different, I mean, certainly Christians around the world today are in different countries that are, some are more hostile than others. And, we have all these forces around us that some of them aren't so benevolent, and, different governments and things. And, but, God is with us, and that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. And that the coming and going of all of these empires and nations is something that's been going on for all of time, or all of human history at least. You know, um, well, I hope our civilization sticks around for a little while, but if it doesn't, I hope that that's when Jesus comes back and we don't have to go through any tribulation. But
Well, one thing that you brought up, I did find of interest. The reading from John 18.
Mm. The
Uh,
pilot, the interaction with Pilate.
yes, they're in John 18, um, in verse uh, 37. Uh, the reason I have been born, the reason I have come into the world is to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to me. And then Pilate asked him, what is truth? Um,
Which was one of the best questions. And then he leaves, and then he walks
Yeah,
away.
I think Pilate was trying to say, like, I'll show you truth, basically. Like, truth is what I say it is, or what Rome decides it is, or something.
Yeah.
uh, I do think that is what Pilate meant to imply. Uh, but Jesus was making a much more profound statement of a universal that I think is ultimately useful for all of us to at least think about. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to Yahshua. Um, that's important. Uh,
Now, was Pilate implying that, kind of like what is truth? It's whatever, like Nathaniel was saying, like whatever we say it is, because we're Rome and we can, we have the power to decide what truth is. Sort
Well,
of.
I've kind of got the image of like him standing there, kind of arguing with Jesus, and then he turns. He kind of just like at that he like turns, and then like as he's walking away, he kind of like just says over his shoulder like, "What is truth?" And then
Yeah.
like kind of acknowledging that he's wrong, like he's in the wrong, but that he has the power to make truth, kind of,
Yeah.
or so he believes.
I think
Because he doesn't argue against him or whatever.
I think even Pilate meant that as a question with multiple layers. I do think Pilate meant that in the way that you're talking about it, son, but I also think Pilate meant that in a truer sense of asking Jesus, what is truth? I
Hmm.
think he was sincerely asking Jesus about truth.
Well,
Yeah.
if he was asking, then he should have stuck around for the answer.
Yeah. How much was the angry mob pulling him outside? I mean, there was a mob out there, but uh well, and I do wonder about the Roman and this might be too much of a tangent, but I do wonder about the what their concepts were of things like that. Like if they were kind of more, I mean, they weren't postmodern in that like, well, everything's relative and whatever you say is true. And, it's, but I don't know what the Romans really thought about. I mean, I guess you could look at the writings of what's that guy's name that wrote the Marcus Aurelius or something like that. That
He was
oh,
one
that
of
would be
them.
a good sample of like Roman philosophy of, you know.
Seneca was another one. Uh,
I mean, they certainly had hedonists, but I don't know if that was like the like Rome at its height, like if that was like the core of their. I seem to think like I guess the idyllic version of it would be like Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or something like that. But
that is something I never studied was their core beliefs of truth. Uh, I know they were very wrapped up in pragmatism.
Yeah.
Um, uh, it was it was very much what you can do.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, who can lead? Who can rule? Who's the strongest?
Well, no,
Uh,
the centurion he had faith, but was his faith kind of rooted? Yeah. Well, I guess I'm shifting to like the centurion that Jesus healed his servant, like earlier in the story of Jesus. But
yeah,
the centurion starts talking about authority, and he uses like really concrete like terms, like, "Well, I have these men under me, and I tell them to do this thing, and they do it, and we just kind of accept it as like it is what it is." But Jesus found that to be like a good statement of faith. But I guess you kind of did have to have faith. The Romans, I guess they had faith in their system, as being like,
oh yeah.
was this our system's a good system and we have faith in it. And, yeah,
Yep.
Well, it had worked for reasonably well for a few hundred years,
yeah,
and you obeyed the orders of the people over you, and uh, you obeyed your leadership. And if you didn't, your leadership's going to kill you. You will obey.
Hmm. Well,
It's
and
very
one,
straightforward.
one one thing about Jesus that a lot of people noticed was that he spoke with authority like from the first person. And a lot of the Jewish teachers would talk about like, well, I speak on the authority of this rabbi who spoke on the authority of that rabbi, and they would have a big list.
Right.
So Jesus was unique in that regard, in that he would just speak and say like, "Oh, God says this," and this is the way it is. It's
Yeah.
very plainly, and
Um, and that was something unique to Jesus. Uh,
it seemed like the
something,
centurion admired that.
yes, he did.
Yeah,
Centurion respected that.
yeah.
Uh, it allowed the centurion to have faith in Jesus and his power.
Now, what do you make of the other centurion? And I know our time is getting a little late, but I've often wondered about, when Jesus died on the cross, there was that other centurion. I don't think it was the same centurion, but I mean, we don't know. But that said, surely this was the Son of God. When Jesus died and he gave his last breath, and the temple curtain was torn, and there was an earthquake, and all this stuff happened. Do you see that as like some kind of statement of faith, or was that some kind of just observation, like in his
I think
gut,
that
that
was
it
a
was?
statement of faith. I don't think it was the same centurion.
Oh, okay.
Uh, that was a, I, I, I am led to believe that that was a different centurion, and that was his statement of faith
Hmm.
caused coming about from his personal experience. Uh, his experience in that time caused him to believe that this man was the Son of God.
And it is fascinating to look at the time of Daniel, where you have this other culture that's very different. Like the Babylonians were very different, and the Persians were very different, and it was very pagan culture that had different ideas about a lot of things, coming into contact with these people who worshiped one God. And and then you have, at the time of Jesus, you have the Romans who were, polytheists. They worshipped a lot. They worshipped Jupiter, and like they kind of had a similar pantheon to the Greeks, right? They had kind of a
Yeah.
parallel Um, but they didn't necessarily they were just a completely different culture and system, and and they came into contact with um Jesus and this monotheistic kind of Eastern system, and it's interesting to see how they interact. And uh I think the Chosen series does do a good job of showing some of that, just from what I've seen. I need to watch more of it, but just kind of how the Romans were and kind of how the Jews were, and they had to kind of, it was a very complicated relationship for sure between the
Yes,
two.
it was. The Romans, I think the Romans had difficulty with it.
Yeah.
You know, uh, the Romans, the Romans had no experience, uh, no experience at all with a faith, with faith like that, with a religion uh, that produced results such as what Jesus displayed. Actually, no one, even the even the Jews, uh, even though it was a direct result of a manifestation of their God, uh, uh, and they had culturally had experiences with the power of their God culturally before. Jesus was completely different, and his manifestations of power with individuals was something unprecedented to them, and they did not know how to deal with it.
Well, and I'll leave you with a question that, and it's wanted to leave us with something more. Well, I think we've talked about some things that are important, but I've always wondered this, that, with the just looking at the events of the resurrection and the Roman soldiers that were hired to guard the tomb, you know, um, I've wondered because in all the other instances when somebody escapes, like with the escape from prison or something, and if the guard doesn't prevent them from escaping, they execute the Romans execute the Roman guard that was, because they failed in their duty or whatever it was. Kind of harsh, but you know. But in the case of Jesus and the tomb, they get paid off, to not say anything, which I always found kind of interesting. The
I
Jewish
guess they're not going to roll the stone back to check that the
the
dead guy is still there.
so I don't know. I've always wondered about that, but I mean, I know the religious leaders were the ones that paid them off and said, like, just say that his disciples came and stole him, but wouldn't I guess they were working as like contract workers, so I don't know if they were officially like, but I would think that the Romans would have an issue with, whoever their commanding officer was would have an issue with them.
Yeah, the Romans would have had a problem with that.
So, but we don't know of their fate. I mean, we don't know if they were later,
Yeah, the Jewish the Jewish Sanhedrin would have had to have smoothed it over with the Roman higher ups, with Pilate and the Roman command, for those people to have lived.
because I don't think it would have sat well with the Romans to if those soldiers came and said like, "Hey, this angel came and we were just, knocked out or
Scared shitless, yeah.
scared Jill and passed out on the side of the cave, and and, like, well, we woke up and he was gone. I don't know.
Yeah, it would not have, that would not have worked.
So
So yeah, that's something that just would not have, that would not have worked.
yeah, because there was an instance in the book of Acts where wasn't Peter broken out of jail by the
Yeah.
angel, and the Roman guards that were guarding the jail the next morning when they didn't find Peter in the jail, they were executed. You know, which was I think was like the rule. Like if if you let somebody if you were guarding a prisoner and the prisoner escaped, you didn't.
Well, there was one of those instances where, was it Peter and, I don't know if it was Peter and somebody or Paul and somebody
Yeah.
were in jail, and uh, the all the cells were opened, and um,
Oh, the guard was about to kill himself, right? When they said, no, we're here, we're fine.
yeah, we're still here. Don't
Yeah.
worry about it. We're here.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, things like that. Yeah, yeah,
That's
that was a Christian thing to do.
yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah. Um, but anyway, I mean there are so many parallels we could see here to the Christians in the Roman Empire, the disciples and the followers of Jesus in the Roman Empire to today, and the time of the exile. And I've heard a lot of people talk about, the time of the exile is a good book to look at just to navigate, especially if you're in a culture that is, and I think our culture is undergoing some changes, both good and, I mean, there
Oh
certainly
yeah,
is kind of a revival happening right now, I think, and
yes, there is.
but uh, you know, it's a good it's a the book of Daniel, and I mean, it is a good Old Testament book to look at to navigate challenging times for sure. And again, the kind of the big picture idea is that God is with us, and um, that the kingdom of God endures. God is able to work through circumstances and the rise and fall of nations and kings and empires, and um, that there's hope through all of that. And I mean, especially with the resurrection, kind of tying everything together, especially with the resurrection, we celebrate, the triumph over death, and having hope. And anyway, those are my kind of my concluding thoughts here, but feel free to add anything. Um,
I think that's a good place at which to leave us.
Indeed, indeed. And we wish you all you're probably listening to this after Easter Sunday, but we retroactively wish you a good Easter Resurrection Sunday. And
He is risen.
he is risen. Yes, already. So,
Indeed.
indeed. Well, we will be back with episode 67, and we will be somewhere in the New Testament, but we'll try to follow that chronological order that we have it. So, um, we thank you for your listening of this, and you have a good week wherever you are. And I'm going to do my hands like, oh, you live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Very good. I'm going to have to do like cuts of that now, but that's okay.